It's really great to be here with you guys. We're going to, I want to just give you a little bit of a forecast for what we're going to do over the next few days. And tonight we're going to actually take some time to introduce ourselves to you, tell you a little bit about our story so you kind of know who it is that's talking to you. And we're going to tell you a little bit about what we do and what our ministry is. So tonight is going to be a bit of an overview of ourselves, of each of us, and our ministry, which is Jews for Jesus. So we work for an organization called Jews for Jesus. It's an international mission that reaches out to Jewish people with the message of Jesus. And so we're going to tell you a little bit about the organization and some of what kind of how we go about doing our work. Tomorrow morning we have the grill, right? The speaker grill. So you guys kind of like take that. So, bring us any questions you've got. And then tomorrow night, what we're going to talk about are some basic steps in evangelism and sharing your faith. And we're going to do a little bit of some role playing during that time. And so that's going to be tomorrow night. It'll be a lot of fun. And it's a little bit of prep for what we'll be doing down in LA in a couple weeks when you come down and work with us. Wednesday night, we're going to be leading you guys through a Passover Seder. And if you've never done a Passover Seder before, this is the kind of the background to Jesus and what he was doing when he instituted communion. And so, but it's a very common experience, holiday in Jewish families. And so we're going to be kind of leading you through, so that's going to be Wednesday. And then Thursday morning, which is the last session, we're going to do a bit of an overview with you on Israel and a bit of a history of the modern state of Israel, and a little bit about what's going on now in light of the war in Gaza since October 7th, and talk a little bit about how to engage some of the kind of social justice questions that many of us have about things like colonialism and things like apartheid and some of the slogans that you guys see, we all see on social media, and so and then a little bit of some suggestions on how to engage as Christians to a subject that is challenging like this. So that's a little bit of our outline, so it should be interesting. We're also here just really happy to hang out with you guys and spend time with you. So we will be around, and we are happy to engage and happy to talk, and so bring it on. So all the different things. So I'll let Annette start up, and then I'll go after her.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Josh and I, just to give you a little bit more background, Josh and I have been married for 30 years. This year.
30 years.
Thank you. And happily married for 30 years.
Happily for 27. No, just kidding. Yeah, sorry.
And we have
Sorry.
two.
Dark humor. It comes with the territory.
Yes,
so,
yes,
yeah.
that's right. And we have two daughters, Eliana and Talia. Eliana's 25, lives in Portland, Oregon. She's getting married in April. Mm-hmm. And then Talia is 23, and she's a senior at Sacramento State.
Yep.
So, so that's just...
Eliana's getting married in a cave. No way. In Virginia. Mm-hmm. She's doing a destination wedding in a cave.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's one of a kind. Yeah, so that's our. How do you do that? Well, I'll tell you in a couple months. So.
We'll tell you more about it if you want to know. So yes, but anyway, a little bit about my background. So I'm always very happy to come to Hume Lake because I've been coming to Hume Lake since day one of my life. I am a Fresnan. Any other Fresnans in the crowd? Wow, just a few. Okay. Wow, I thought there would be more of you, but anyway. So, but my grandparents built a cabin here at Hume Lake in 1959. So as I said, I was coming from day one, and I would work in the winter times. They'd bring up a van of church kids to do serving the winter, conference people, and so I'd be a waitress on the weekends while I was in high school up here. I did a little bit of summer work, like at the end of one of the summers, as like a fill-in person. So I love Hume Lake. I only went to camp once. I went to Wagon Train once or maybe twice, and that was it. I was a music geek, so I preferred music camp down at Lake Sequoia Lake. But anyway, for me, so I grew up in a Jewish home. My dad is Jewish, my mom is non-Jewish, and actually my grandparents on my dad's side were refugees during World War II. They had to leave Vienna, Austria, because the Nazis had taken over. Everybody was happy to have them come into Austria and take over the country. And that was when my grandmother said to my grandfather, "Arthur, it's time for us to leave." And so my grandparents eventually ended up in Fresno because the Jewish community of Fresno actually sponsored some of our family to come to California. And so that's how there's a small Jewish community in Fresno, and we were part of that because they helped, save our family from the Holocaust, though a number of my relatives stayed and perished there at that time. But when my grandfather came to settle with his family, his brother was living here, and they started a business recycling feed and seed sacks from farmers around the Central Valley. So they'd go around to the farms and they'd buy back the old feed and seed sacks, the cotton and the burlap, and it was like recycling business. They'd buy back the old ones, they'd bring them home, clean them, stitch them up, repair them, and sell them back to the feed and seed companies. And so my grandfather, he was educated at Vienna University. He was an oral surgeon, but he only spoke German. And so he wasn't able to practice medicine, here in the States. So he did this business, and one of the days when he was tooling around on those country roads, he was in Reedley, and he came to the farm of a guy whose last name was Clausen. And this guy was a German-speaking Mennonite. And he loved the Lord. Later on, I met his daughter, and his daughter told us more of the story of what happened. But Farmer Clausen loved the Lord, taught his children, that the Jewish people were God's chosen people, and that we should pray for them. And who should show up on Clausen's doorstep but my grandfather, Arthur Morgenstern. And so his daughter told me that, my grandpa would come and do business with her dad, and then afterwards they'd go into the kitchen and have a cup of coffee together and open up the Bible and argue about who the Messiah was supposed to be. And that happened several times, and eventually my grandfather became convinced that Jesus was indeed the Messiah for everybody, for the Jewish people too. And so he came to faith in Jesus as Messiah. So did my grandmother, and that was the kind of background that then my dad and my uncle were raised in. So it was interesting because they were told, this was in the 1940s, and they were told, well, if you're Jewish and you come to faith in Jesus, you've converted. And so you're no longer Jewish, you're Christian. And so from that point on, that was kind of like the background that my father and my uncle were raised with, going to church. So even though their last name was Morgenstern, they thought of themselves as Christians and not really as Jewish anymore. And so my dad married my mom, and they both became believers when they were teenagers. And so I was raised going to church from day one, and when I was 5 years old, my mom, prayed with me to receive Jesus. And right around that same time, my father's pastor introduced him to this group of people that called themselves Jews for Jesus. And their idea was, and kind of something that they were communicating, was that actually if Jesus is the Messiah, then he's the Messiah for everyone, including the Jewish people. And if God made you Jewish, following Jesus doesn't make you stop being Jewish, but rather it fits all into who you are and who God made you. And you don't have to stop being who God made you. You don't have to give up your culture, your heritage, your traditions, things like that. And so that was so from that point on, our family kind of changed a little bit, and we were this kind of mix of Jewish, believing in Jesus, and so we would celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah, Passover and Easter, and it wasn't just like double holidays, but it was really like an understanding. I would go to church and I'd learn about Jesus, and here was this Jewish man whose ministry was all in Israel. His disciples were all Jewish. So in my mind, it always made perfect sense. Well, why wouldn't a Jewish person believe in Jesus, And our immediate family were all believers in Jesus, and it wasn't until I was, an adult that I realized that the majority of the Jewish world did not believe like my family did. But that was kind of what was going on in our family as I was growing up. And when I was about 12, I think, I started to ask myself, well, do I really believe this for myself? Or is this just my parents' faith? And began to question, do I believe in God? And even at that age, I realized life is incredibly meaningful and not like a random set of circumstances that happen. And so to me, it really felt like it took more faith to believe that there's no God and that life is just by chance. And even at that age, I already felt like to turn my back on God would be like turning my back on my own father. I already felt him that much in my life. And so I really at that point embraced faith in Jesus on my own as well, and I asked to be baptized because I wanted to make that pronouncement and also my desire to share that good news with other people. So I ended up, all my family graduated from Fresno State. My mom was a professor at Fresno State. I went to Biola. My brothers went to Fresno State. I went to Biola because I ran into somebody at a recruitment fair and I was like, this sounds like a really amazing school. And I wanted the adventure too, and I loved LA. Loved going to Biola. I studied music. I was a music major there. But I loved the 30 units of Bible, the chapels, all of that stuff, the environment, and it was just a wonderful place to study. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but the very first day I walked into the music building, there was up on the billboard, there was a letter from Jews for Jesus and Jews for Jesus letterhead that had been tacked up there, and it caught my eye immediately. It was the first thing I saw. And it was the local LA branch, and they said they were looking for musicians to volunteer for their local music team. And in those days at Biola, everybody had to do Christian service hours every week. You had to do some kind of like ministry or volunteering every week. And so actually all through my college years, I volunteered doing music with their music team, doing street evangelism with Jews for Jesus. So it was kind of cool the way the Lord worked that out. After I finished at Biola, I served with a national touring team, musical touring team that did kind of evangelism and singing in churches on college campuses. And we traveled around both domestically and overseas as well for a couple of years. And then I took, what's that?
You lived on a bus?
Yes, we lived on a bus. I lived on a bus for for a year and a half. It was...
It's like a mobile Joshua.
yeah, imagine being crammed in a bus with a bunch of, yes.
What was it called?
The singing team was called the Liberated Wailing Wall. The Liberated Wailing Wall. It got that funky name because it was created in the early 1970s when groups had weird names like Strawberry Alarm Clock and Jefferson Airplane. So that was why it had a weird name. And the group kind of like changed personnel every year and a half. So I was the early 90s version of the team. So anyway, then when I was finished with that tour, I was invited to go into missionary training with Jews for Jesus, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. Came back to Fresno for a semester and prayed, went on a few dates, tried out a few job opportunities, did a few different things, trying to figure out, is there something for me back here at home, or should I go for it? And I didn't feel like after those 6 months, like that there was anything necessarily bringing me back home. So I went ahead and went into missionary training in New York City with Jews for Jesus. So yes, so this Fresno girl went all the way to New York City, and one of my first assignments was to go and hand out gospel tracts in Times Square on New Year's Eve. And Josh was also assigned to that job that evening, and that was and the evening we met.
That's right.
So we didn't fall in love, wasn't love at first sight or anything. So, but that's where we
actually met in Times Square on New Year's Eve.
Actually, in the
subway station.
in the subway
actually,
station underneath, which
Wasn't
is a
quite as romantic,
lot less
but
romantic,
yeah.
a little smelly down there. It was a little stinky down there, but yeah, it's not so romantic. Yeah, so. But currently, so and I served for about, for the first, I don't know, I think I served from 93 to 98. I served as a missionary after I trained, both in New York and in LA, and then had kids, and I spent a lot of years raising my girls and actually took off from doing missionary work for those years. And then a few years ago, once the girls were kind of launched, I came back to being a missionary again. And just when Talia finally finished her AA and went to Sac State, then I went back full time to being a missionary a couple years ago, and love doing it again. And coming back now as a middle-aged mom, I am such a better missionary than I was when I was green, when I was brand new. I didn't know what I was doing at the beginning of it all. But now, after having a lot more life under my belt and coming back as a missionary, it's amazing. It's just been very exciting. So that's what I do. And so my role in Jews for Jesus as a missionary, my most important thing to do is to meet with Jewish women and to share the gospel with them, and when they become believers, to disciple them. I meet one-on-one with Jewish women, sometimes in person, sometimes on Zoom, sometimes on the phone, and then also teach Bible studies and then do evangelism too. So including things that happen with our branch office that's right across the street from UCLA. So we do things that are focused on reaching out to college students too. So we'll be telling you more about that. So, okay, so that's.
All right, so my turn.
Yes.
Here, you can sit down if you want.
Yeah.
There you go. So my story is quite a bit different. So also Jewish. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I grew up in the East Bay, like Berkeley, El Cerrito, if some of you know that area. And to a family, none of my family are believers. Still, none of my family are believers. So grew up in this very, very kind of, all the things you imagine about sort of Berkeley, kind of liberal, that was my family. So we used to go, I would see my parents get arrested, sitting in the middle of the streets, protesting things. That that was kind of our family. My parents, very activist oriented. My mom was a lobbyist in the state of California. So, very political and all of that kind of stuff. And so grew up in this very idealistic family. We were, are Jewish, but not very, very religious. So I tell people we probably would not have, ham, but bacon was kind of okay. So I don't really know why. There's a line between bacon and ham, but there was. And so we were probably more secular in terms of our Jewish identity. Our family celebrated a lot of the Jewish holidays. I had a bar mitzvah. I went to Jewish camp in the summers. Went to Israel. Learned Hebrew as a kid and all of that. But if you would have asked me, what about these different things in the Bible? I would have pretty much told you they're really not true. None of the Bible is true. It's really myth. It's a sacred myth, but it's really just kind of a made-up story. So that was sort of my background as I was growing up. There was kind of growing up in the 1980s, and there was all kinds of things going on in the world. And I was kind of looking forward to doing something that had a little bit more meaning with my life. I wasn't sure what that was. I knew I was going to go to college, but I wasn't quite ready when I was 18. So a buddy and I decided to go around the world. And we bought 2 backpacks, and we worked 3 jobs and saved up as much money as we could. And about 3 months after my 18th birthday, we flew from San Francisco to New Zealand. And we were going to just keep going around the world until we got home and have this great adventure. So we were in New Zealand for maybe about 2 months and started running out of money because it was all more expensive than we were planning. And we got jobs picking apples on an orchard in New Zealand. And that's where I first encountered people who believed in Jesus. Like, I didn't know anybody growing up that believed in Jesus. I didn't know anybody. I knew some people who went to church and they said they believed in Jesus, but it didn't seem to make any difference in their life. They were just like everybody else, so I didn't think it really mattered. So this was the first time I'd ever met people who were actually kind of serious about their faith. They would read the Bible, they would pray, they would listen to Christian music, which I didn't know. I didn't even know that existed. I was so far out of that world. So they started asking me questions, and they said, "Josh, what do you believe?" And I said, "Well, I'm Jewish," And they said, "Oh, that's cool. You're Jewish." And which I thought that was weird that they thought that was cool. And they said, "Oh, well, what do you believe?" And I told them, I said, "Well, I'm Jewish, so that's the answer." And they said, no, do you believe in the Bible? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in Moses? And they started asking me, and I just said, "Look, I don't really believe anything. I'm just Jewish. That's pretty much it." And that made sense to me. It didn't make sense to them. And so they said, "Well, can we tell you about what we believe?" And so they did. And we would spend the whole day picking apples and talking about Jesus. And it was fascinating. I thought they were, in the beginning, I thought they were sweet, but pretty silly. The idea that somebody would actually believe in Jesus didn't make any sense to me, or God at all. It just all seemed foolish. Like, you believe in the tooth fairy. Come on, people. And so, but the more I started talking, it was intriguing, and they loaned me a Bible. And I could read it in Hebrew, but I didn't really understand, so this was in English. And so they loaned me a Bible, and I started flipping through, and I settled on a book that's still probably my favorite book in the Bible, which was Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes was the first book in the Bible I ever read, and I felt like I read about me. And all the things I think about, obsess about, worry about, are excited about, they're all in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I was really shocked that it could be kind of relevant. So that led me down this road of, over the next couple of months, talking and thinking a lot and weighing the questions of Jesus. And so it got to a point where I knew that I needed to make a decision. So one night we were at kind of they invited me to a Bible study that I would go every once in a while. And so we were at this Bible study, and afterwards they asked me if they could pray for me, which they did a few times. I always felt weird about it, but I said, okay, that's fine. So I'm not really sure why they did this, but we were all kind of sitting in a circle. And so one guy got a chair and put it in the middle of the circle, and he said, "Sit on that chair." And then I said, "All right." And he said, "Well, I want you to repeat after me." And I said, "What are you going to say?" And he went, "I accept Jesus as my Savior, I commit my life to him, and I'm going to follow him." Straight out. And so, okay, I didn't know a lot about theology. In fact, I knew nothing about theology. But I knew that formula meant that I'm in. That's pretty much what I knew. And I knew that unless I really said yes, I would never really know if it was true. I'd always be sort of an outsider. And so I said, and I figured, if it's wrong, so what? What do I have to lose? So I said yes. Prayed, invited Jesus to be my Savior, had this real sense that God was present. And it was really amazing. Went through over the next couple of months praying, thinking, reading the Bible, studying more eventually, and then at the end of those couple months got baptized. And then I was really in. I mean, and that was 1988 when that happened, so it was a long time ago. And called my parents. They were furious. I was just livid. My dad was just screaming at me on the phone. Like, how could you do something so stupid as this? What's the matter with you? You know? And so that was the sort of world that I was sort of walking into. So stayed in New Zealand for about another year, and then came back to the United States. Living at home was rough, and so moved to Lake Tahoe and lived there for about 4 years. Visited a couple of churches, didn't know anything about church. I stayed at the one that had donuts before the service, and that was, of course, the Baptist church, right? So that's where I stayed and got involved, and they were the ones that really sort of told me about Jews for Jesus. And I just, from day one, really had this sense that God was present, and I wanted to do something that involved him. And so ended up, through a few twists and turns, doing a short-term missions trip with Jews for Jesus in the summer when I was in college. And it was a evangelistic outreach in New York City for 6 weeks. And I just loved it. And so I moved to New York and became a volunteer. And so I graduated from Brooklyn College in New York City, and became a pretty committed volunteer. That was when I met Annette, and we ended up getting married. I ended up coming on staff. And, you know, the process for me of trying to figure out, is this something that God is calling me to? I will tell you, when I first started, I would have said, I'm not really sure. I know this is not a bad thing, but it was in the process of those first couple of years, right about somewhere between year 2 and year 3, that I really had that kind of confidence and settled sense that this is where God is leading me. So I became a missionary, and again, that was about 30 years ago. So I started in 94 when I came on staff. I've served as a missionary in lots of different roles, mostly, and our time with Jews for Jesus has basically been split between New York City and Los Angeles. We've lived about 15 years in both places. We raised our kids in New York, which was great. And so now my job is I oversee our training of new missionaries and new staff, and training of leaders and leadership development around the world. And so I'm part of our global team that kind of works. Jews for Jesus is got about 250 staff working in 14 different countries. The largest work is in Tel Aviv, where we have about 50 staff or so working in our Tel Aviv office. And the two big distinctives of Jews for Jesus are that our ministry focuses on reaching Jewish people with the gospel. So if you're a church, for example, and you're in, I don't know, a town, you're in Fresno, right? So you're going to kind of reach whoever's around you. That's the idea. You're kind of geographic in your focus. So if what's around you are people that speak Mandarin, you're going to have a Mandarin ministry, or English, you're going to have an English, or Spanish, and you're that kind of thing. So for us, our ministry is focused on a group of people, and that is the Jewish people, that we are specifically geared to share the gospel with Jewish people around the world. Similar to if you have a college ministry, you're focusing on college students. So it's sort of audience-oriented and audience-based. And the second distinctive of Jews for Jesus is we are something that's called, in the missions world, an insider ministry, which means that our staff are also Jewish. And so to serve with Jews for Jesus, you need to be either Jewish or married to somebody that's Jewish. And so our ministry is sort of based on the idea that we are Jewish people talking to other Jewish people about Jesus. And it's not to say that other ministries don't have fruit or are bad ideas or anything. That's just how we would do it. It'd be similar if you, let's say, had a ministry that focuses on women, a ministry to women, and there's just like a bunch of guys that work for that ministry. That might be a little, I don't know, just off, And so that's a little bit about how we focus. So we're in 12 countries. We're currently serving in 2 countries that have active wars going on, Ukraine and Israel. About 2/3 of the staff are out of the U.S., about 1/3 are in the U.S., and in the United States we have 2 offices that are really kind of functioning, and that's in New York City and Los Angeles. And those 2 cities have the largest Jewish communities of any urban populations in America. So out of about 5 million Jewish people in America, 2 million live in the New York metropolitan area, and 750,000 live in LA. So more than half of all of the Jewish people in America live in these 2 cities, or at least the kind of metro areas. So that's a little bit about us. We'll talk more, but that's a little bit of a kind of a taste of who we are. Do you want to do the last part, or do you want me to do that part?
About the contextualization.
Yeah, and the or do you want to do that together?
Yeah, I think we
Okay.
should do it together.
Okay.
I'm messing up the
Yeah, don't
microphone
do-
there.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
there's a word that in the world of missions and ministry is thrown around a lot, and maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't. But I wanna kind of orient you to this word, and this will help our conversation tomorrow night. And the word's contextualization. Have you ever heard that word? All right. What is it basically? Let's see if we can kind of throw out a couple of ideas of kind of what it means. It's hard to get an exact definition, but it's sort of a variety of things. So what basically does contextualization mean?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, you got to talk a little louder. Giving context to a situation. Okay, good. So it's definitely connected to context, and when you say a situation, do you have anything in mind? Okay, or it could be anything. Okay, good. So it's kind of thinking about and dealing with the context of the situation. Is that, yeah? Okay, good, good. Anybody want to add to that or have another thought that they bring into that? Yeah? Or?
I'd say it's adjusting your message and your method to the people you're ministering to.
Aha, okay. So it's also using that context to sort of adjust your message and tweak it a little bit. Okay, good, good, nice. What were you going to say?
I was just gonna say, like, a Christian talking about Christianity.
Okay.
But
Good. Okay, so tell me a little bit, because I think you're right. No, but tell me a little bit more about what you have in mind when you say that.
someone who knows what they're talking about.
Oh, good. Okay, so contextualization is not like winging it.
Yeah.
Like you kind of have to. You also have to be aware, and you have to know what you're talking about. Very good. That's a really important point. So good job. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, a really simple example of contextualization is language. If I go on a short-term missions trip to a place that doesn't speak English, and I go and I only speak English, I am not contextualizing my message for those people. That's a very simple way. But often when we talk about contextualization, we're actually talking about an idea that culture is kind of like a language. So the way in people function, the kind of values, the way in people engage is kind of like a language. And contextualizing the gospel is a way of bringing that message into a sort of cultural environment so that the people in that environment will understand what you're talking about. Yeah.
That'd be like replacing words like sin.
Yeah. So what would be what would be an example, like another word that you can use for sin?
Or even not just a single word, but like a description.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're definitely on the right track. Yeah. Disobedience, okay.
Yeah. Did you have one too?
Crime, okay. Good. Well, right, and so you're looking for things that like make sense to the people you're talking to. Right, for sure. So this is like a little bit about the way in which missions works and sharing the gospel in an appropriate way works. It takes a lot of time, a lot of experimentation, and usually a lot of mistakes before you sort of get there. But it's really the foundation. So for us, with Jews for Jesus, here was one of the things that we did to contextualize the message. We had an outreach campaign that was called Yeshua, the Jewish way to say Jesus. Yeshua is Jesus' name in Hebrew. And so when we said that, it was a way of saying that Jesus is not like completely separate from Jewish people and Jewish things, but Jesus is something that Jewish people can engage with. And here's a way of thinking about it, calling him Yeshua instead of Jesus. So that's an example of how methodology or contextualization worked with Jews for Jesus. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about these things?
Yeah.
'Cause I can
So
talk
the
about one of
beginnings.
them.
Why don't
Yeah.
you start, like,
so,
this is the
yeah,
early
so
days.
kind of the way that we started with that idea at the very beginning of Jews for Jesus, it was because there was a guy named Moishe Rosen who already worked for a Jewish ministry that was called American Board of Missions to the Jews. And Moishe, became a believer in like the 1950s. He wore a suit. He had a crew cut, suit and tie, and he was. And the ministry to Jewish people in those days was a certain context, kind of the 50s style, very kind of somewhat straight-laced, very church-oriented.
Okay.
But
so
then,
really, hold on a
yes.
second. Have you all seen that movie Jesus Revolution?
yeah.
Okay.
uh-huh.
Have that idea that movie
Yeah.
in your mind as she's telling this story.
Right. So right around that same time that the Jesus Revolution was happening, late 60s, early 70s, Moishe hears about this, about how there's this, this great spiritual movement happening amongst the young people of America. And of course, at the same time as that, there's also just a lot of stuff going on in America in terms of like protesting against the Civil War, against the Vietnam War, civil rights, activism happening, things like that. And so there's just a lot of people out on the streets protesting, carrying signs, handing out pamphlets, stuff like that. And during that time, Jewish young people were also out there on the streets, both for like political reasons, but they were also, some of them were becoming interested in Jesus as well. And Moishe is hearing about these things, so he goes out to San Francisco, which was really one of the places that was kind of the heart of what was happening, in this kind of youth movement and Jesus movement. And he sees that, all of that happening, and he decides, I think we need to contextualize this message to this new generation. And so, he just sat down and hand wrote out really quickly something that was like humorous and just handwritten with some cartoons. And the very first gospel tract that he wrote to be handed out, it was called A Message from a Square.
Okay,
And-
so you should explain something, because
Yeah.
when you guys hear handing out gospel tracts,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what that means? Kinda. Okay, so
Yeah,
you
it's
need
like
to like explain.
it's like
that
a
a bit,
8.5 by
Yeah.
11 piece of paper with handwritten stuff on it that then we would fold, and it had a short little message on there that sort of starts the gospel conversation, and it has our address on the back, and we take it and like on a hand printer thing, and print them off, fold them up, take them out, hand them out, and try to talk to people
Yeah.
and get conversations going.
And in those
Uh-huh.
days, tons of people were doing this. So this is pre-digital communication. So if you were in a city and it was the early 70s, every street corner has like 10 people handing things out, and they've got ideas about stuff. This is the way in which people communicated. So it really worked in the context of that group of people. This is the sort of adapting your message to people around.
We
Yeah,
do other
good.
things like we'd wear T-shirts, that said things like "Jesus made me kosher." We do little street dramas.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Music. Music out there on the streets, and all of that stuff was happening already. About all sorts of subjects, and we wanted to do it
Yeah.
about Jesus. We also would go out, we'd march with signs, that had
Mm-hmm.
messages on there, Jews for Jesus or whatever. So that was how we were contextualizing
Yeah.
for that day and that generation.
So in the
Yeah.
same way that in that movie Jesus Revolution, they sort of go from this like a church in a very traditional kind of straight-laced world into like baptizing people on the beach. In San Francisco, it wasn't hanging out on the beach, it was like activism on the streets. And so that became very much part of the identity of the early days of Jews for Jesus. And that was an early example for us of contextualization.
Now, we're not that old. We were babies. We were babies when that was
That's
happening.
right. We're that
we
old,
came
don't worry
into we came into the ministry like in the
Yeah.
early 90s.
Yeah.
And actually when we came into the ministry, Jews for Jesus was still doing a lot of these same kinds
Yeah.
of techniques. And so we were getting out there and doing all this stuff on the streets of LA and New York
Mm-hmm.
and San Francisco, crazy stuff. Sometimes we dress up like clowns and do street drama or whatever. But over the years, over these 30 years that we've served, this stuff became less and less effective
Yeah.
because this isn't where it's happening anymore, where messages are going out, where people are really listening. Now it's completely changed how that happens, especially here in America. And so
Yeah.
in the last probably 10, 15 years,
Yeah.
the ministry's really been
Yeah.
trying to figure out, okay, what is our next way
Yeah.
of contextualizing for the Jewish people in America and overseas too.
So,
Yeah.
so one of the things that happened for us was that about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, things started to change. It really follows the same pattern of like digital media, cell phones, and kind of a little bit before social media, but just the fact that there was digital communication happening. And things like handing out pamphlets stopped working. Also, we used to start conversations on the street and we would say, "Can I ask you a question? Who do you think Jesus is?" And lots of people would engage with us. I might be on a street corner in New York City for a couple hours. I would just have conversation after conversation after conversation. Now, I wouldn't have one conversation. And if I started a conversation that way, especially in Los Angeles, people would kind of say, "Oh man, you're being like way too aggressive, calm down, that's too much." So what we've realized in LA, for example, is I can't, if I wanted to have a conversation with Annette, not my wife, just some other Annette, and about spiritual things, I can't really have the conversation just between her and I. I need some other third piece. And so what we've really started doing is doing a lot of outreach that involves art. And so what we found is we're able to communicate to a person through a piece of art. And art is not just, a painting, but it's also, it's movement, it's all kinds of things. And so what we have now in Los Angeles, and you'll see it in a couple weeks, is we opened a coffee shop and art gallery. We're actively using sort of art as a kind of a tool to contextualize the gospel to this new generation of people. In probably another 10 or 15 years, that will also change. And they're going to be a new generation. They're going to have new ideas, and it's going to, who knows, maybe we'll go back to handing out pamphlets or something. But you don't know. But so the, sorry, I didn't.
Well, I was going to say, that's one thing that we're doing.
Okay.
Another, I was telling some of the students who are sitting with me at the table, I'm also part of a team called the Jewish Gentile Couples Team. Because now the majority of Jewish people in America intermarry with somebody of a different faith. And then it gets very confusing, like, okay, what kind of wedding are we going to have? Are we going to, observe some kind of religion or none? What happens with the kids? And when those questions start to come up, they start looking, online for answers for that. And we have a website called jewishgentilecouples.com. And people on there volunteering to do live chat, and that's one of the ways that now we're meeting a need that is really obviously out there, and having great conversations with people about the fact that you can have spiritual harmony through faith in Jesus, and that your Jewish partner doesn't have to stop being Jewish to embrace faith in Jesus, and you can both be who God made you, but spiritually joined through faith in Jesus. So
And
that's
you
one
want to
example.
explain the live chat, the online evangelism
Right,
team?
and our website, not only the jewishgentilecouples.com, but our regular jewsforjesus.org website has live chat volunteers and staff on there. We try to staff it live as much as we can because people are coming on our website 24/7. Going through the articles we have on there. But then if we have somebody available to chat with them, then, that is an awesome way to seem
You guys know what
engaged.
we're talking about when we say live chat, right? So
Yeah.
we're having right now somewhere between, I think, 40 and 50 live conversations of spiritual nature. It's not always like, tell me who Jesus is. It could be kind of, but every day through live chat. And so we have a team of about 6 people that's their full-time work, is just engaging through that sort of digital online format. Yeah.
Right, and we've got that in Israel, in Hebrew, and we've got it. And we also have a couple of websites that we partner with groups that are generating lots of video testimonies. And also, I saw stuff from the Bible Project that's been translated into Hebrew. That's on an Israeli site that we partner with. I was just given the contact information a couple days ago for a woman who's Israeli, lives in San Antonio, Texas, married an American Christian, was on our Hebrew site, and has become, open to the gospel through her husband's witness to her. And so she sent in her contact information because she wants a Hebrew New Testament. But since she lives in the U.S., they gave her name to me. So I gave her a call. We met on Zoom. We talked for an hour and a half. I started to answer her questions. Her biggest thing that's hard to believe is that Jesus could be God. That she, because Jewish people believe there's one God. So how could a man be God, And so I invited her to either study one-on-one with me, or if she'd like to come to the Zoom Bible study that I teach for Jewish women. And she came to that. And she actually prayed that night with some of the other women, she was praying for the other women in the name of Yeshua, Jesus. And it was,
Yeah, she's
it's
not
pretty
a
wild.
believer yet.
But she's
doing
already
it
like
anyway, you know,
praying
so.
for the other women,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was wild. But yeah, it's amazing.
So.
Yeah, just to see that. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so that sort of so we're sharing this whole little kind of thing on contextualization because tomorrow night we're going to talk a bit more about conversations and how to engage in evangelism, and so doing some of the kind of role playing stuff. So this is like the kind of foundation of that, what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, and what we're doing. But that. Anything else? I think that kind of takes care of all the stuff that we have for tonight. So, yeah. So, do we turn it back over to Dallas? Okay.
Yeah, I think the question I have, Josh and Annette work with Jews for Jesus, and I don't think any of us are Jewish, but we're going to be working with Jews for Jesus. So, kind of explain, as we are going to be coming down, working with you guys, how do you envision that happening? What does this partnership look like, and how do we come alongside you guys?
Yeah. Actually, I'll let you. You're going to be the contact person for the group down in
Yeah.
LA, so you should answer.
Right. So the way that we did it last year was we partnered with Dave Hall. Is that his name?
Jeff.
Jeff. Yeah. Who's an evangelist down in LA. Who, and I don't know if you guys are going to work with him this year again.
Yeah.
Right. So he teaches you guys about evangelism. You guys go out and try it out in a few places. But then when we had you guys had the Joshua Wilderness students from last year come into our space, we brought them over to UCLA, right across the street from our location, and had you guys talk to the UCLA students. And I believe we used the surveys.
Surveys, yeah.
Right, because we've been trying to figure out, we've been wanting the UCLA students to tell us what kinds of things they'd like to have happen in our space. What kinds of activities are they interested in? And then also there were a few sort of spiritually oriented questions towards the end of the survey as well that were like, what religious background do you come from? What cultural background? And then also, if you filled out the survey, you get a free cup of coffee or a free drink from our cafe. So that's like the incentive to take the survey in the first place. And those last few questions were kind of designed to see if you could get into any kind of a little bit of a spiritual conversation. And, so maybe none of you are Jewish in this group, but you can certainly, you're welcome when you talk about our space. Upside Down is the name of our cafe, Upside Down. And we like to let people know that it's owned and operated by Jews for Jesus. Well, if you say that, to some of the students that you're talking to, then they'll be kind of like, what? And so we give you guys a little bit more background on what Jews for Jesus is, so that if they're curious, you can kind of start to explain that to them. And that itself can bring up some, because sometimes the student might say, oh, well, I'm Jewish, and it might bring up an opportunity for a conversation. Yeah, so.
Yeah, something I'd say about last year is there was a number of the students that were a little kind of nervous on the front end of going, and here you are at UCLA on this big campus full of all these people. But every single one of them found that it was easier to engage in conversations than they were expecting, and people were more willing to go beyond just the survey and kind of talk a little bit more. And the one thing that all of them said was, I wish we had more time on the campus. And
Every
so
single student talked about wanting more time
Yeah.
at UCLA,
Yeah.
which as we were pulling up into the parking spaces, everyone was like, okay, I'm really nervous about
yes,
this.
yeah.
But because of that feedback from last year, you guys are going to be the class that gets more time
Yep.
at UCLA.
Yeah.
So we are going to spend a lot more time at UCLA, and we're going to spend some time at the coffee shop
Yeah.
as well. Which is
Yeah.
gonna
Right,
be-
and we're hoping, and I think we're working
Yeah.
it out for a Friday night, and then, to have like a Shabbat, a Sabbath dinner with you guys too. So, so you guys can experience that too. And we'll see, we'll talk about it with the staff, but maybe what we'll try to do too is invite maybe a handful of the students, the Jewish students who are kind of now on our radar. And so you might get to meet a few of those who are willing to come and interact with you. So we'll see.
That'd be awesome.
Mhm.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Hope you guys are excited to have Josh and Annette here this week.
Yeah.